Hello, and welcome to my presentation on sustainable thinking. Can we change our ideology to reimagine our place in the world? Hello, my name is Sandra Croker. I am a transdisciplinary researcher at Brock University, Ontario, Canada. I have a BA in psychology, an MA in gender studies, another MA in social justice and equity studies, and am currently a PhD candidate in the Child and Youth Department at Brock University. I dabble in philosophy and quantum physics as well. My previous research has involved the breaking down of binaristic thinking and resolving dualisms, including reason and emotion, male and female, qualitative and quantitative, love and work, quantum realm and material realm, and I'm now looking to resolve organismic and mechanistic worldviews. My utopia involves overcoming our need to see the world in binaries because then real change can happen. Psychological well-being is influenced by climate change, and there is substantial evidence showing that weather events and natural disasters impact mental health. Eco-anxiety, also referred to as climate anxiety, is defined as anxiety or worry felt about climate change and its effects, or dread associated with negative environmental information, which includes uncertainty about the future environment, grief about the loss of valued places and things, and concern about possible future harm to one's children. The effects of climate anxiety are prevalent around the world, including countries such as United States, Canada, Australia, Greenland, and Tuvalu, with reports of increased levels of PTSD, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and even domestic violence. The groups most affected by eco-anxiety are Indigenous peoples, the elderly, and children. Regarding children and youth, eco-anxiety has become a growing concern because it is creating existential dread about what lies ahead for millennials. According to Clayton, there has been relatively little acknowledgement of mental health implications of climate change. Therefore, one aim of this project is to create awareness about the seriousness of eco-anxiety. This project will explore eco-anxiety as experienced in people, including Indigenous peoples. Suggestions for how to mitigate the negative effects of anxiety will be discussed. I will first briefly cover some protective factors, which include activism, ecotherapy, and culture. I will then turn to exploring Indigenous experiences and understandings of our relationship with the Earth. Finally, I will discuss suggestions on how to paradigm shift to a healthier worldview by analyzing the difference between mechanistic and organismic thinking. Some protective factors that mitigate the negative effects of eco-anxiety are resilience, good adaptation, social connections, and societal well-being. For example, young people who have characteristics such as resilience, flexibility, and have the interdependent connections to community support systems boost protective factors. Having an attachment figure close during and after natural disasters is also protective, as well as good parenting and the development of executive function skills. If one is not too severely distressed over climate change, then active engagement in climate resolution or doing their part can be a protective factor. If one has not been directly affected by climate change, it is suggested that engagement in climate activism could be considered a form of protective or anticipatory coping. Research shows positive correlations between happiness and environmental action, and even those who perceive the threat from climate change as severe show reduced distress and depressive symptoms when they are involved in behavior to mitigate the problem. Activism, especially eco-activism, is considered the best antidote for anxiety and has been shown to foster resilience, self-efficacy, and agency. Therefore, activism is an important approach for mitigating the negative effects of climate anxiety. Doherty discusses how humans have separated themselves from nature and says that environmental activism can help heal this divide. In those who feel a connection to the earth, being outdoors can provide a restorative experience. There is already strong support for ecotherapy, which uses the wilderness and the natural world to heal. For example, A project called Good Therapy showed that after completing a 40-minute cognitive task designed to induce mental fatigue, the participants who walked in the nature reserve reported less anger and more positive emotions than those who engaged in the other activities. This same project stated that the basis behind ecotherapy derives from the belief that people are part of the web of life and are not isolated or separate from our environment. Consola Wilcox et al. Found positive effects on mental health in the Inuit community when they were out on the land, and that engaging in cultural traditions involving the land is associated with resilience. Culture has also been found to be a protective factor, including cultural rituals. When Indigenous communities feel that the values that are important to their culture are respected, acts of reconciliation and forgiveness are more likely to progress in a positive direction. As stated before, one of the groups most affected by climate change are Indigenous peoples because they are more likely to be living in areas of danger from rising sea levels and melting. According to Aboriginal understandings, the relationship of the human to the environment and other animals and plants, etc., is reciprocal. Moore discusses how we are part of the circle of life and connected to the trees, the water, and even the salmon. There's no separation between humans, animals, and the environment. If distinctions are made, however, they are an I-we distinction, not an I-you contrast. I propose that an I-we distinction could be used to heal our relationship with the earth. This is different from Western understandings that tend towards binaristic thinking and antagonism between categories and a binary. Binaries and binaristic thinking are a product of language and are thus affect our thinking and influence our worldviews. Aboriginal languages such as the Hopi language do not set up the world in binaries, but rather through their language see the world as a unified whole. For example, in the Hopi language, the same word for apple also means tree and also means decay, capturing the cyclical motion of life. The Maori peoples of New Zealand have a worldview based on the principle of Wikipapa, which turns the universe into a moral space where all things great and small are interconnected. Similarly, Mi'kmaq teachings are based on the interconnectedness of all things. These understandings see human beings as interconnected with the living world and are therefore immersed in many relations and connections. In contrast, Romance languages tend to produce a linear, fragmented, and compartmentalized world where elements are divided up into male and female binaries. Languages that divide the world into boxes tend to produce a reductionistic view where the sum of the parts equals the whole. This, in turn, produces a mechanistic worldview. However, reductionism has been falsified, and therefore a mechanistic worldview is based on a false premise. You can see my video on that. I don't have time to go into that exactly. But an organismic worldview, also called organistic or systems thinking, sees the world in terms of complex systems or patterns, with an implicit order of unification rather than division. Complex systems theory, also called nonlinear dynamical systems approach, includes an interconnected, nested system of reality where systems and subsystems interact. An organismic worldview could be considered closer to an indigenous understanding of the earth and can therefore be used to challenge traditional positivist understandings of reductionism and simple causation that focus on linear relationships and individual elements or parts. According to Kuhl and Frost, hostilities between mechanistic and organismic approaches have traditionally been staged as an opposition between mechanistic and vitalist understandings of dead versus lively matter. As well as producing a short-sighted understanding of complex systems, mechanistic thinking objectifies the earth. This objectification subsequently justifies the exploitation of the earth and the unrestrained extraction of its resources for personal gain. Mechanistic thinking, therefore, is a slippery slope towards aggressive neoliberal exploitation of peoples and the earth in pursuit of profit. Neoliberalism is the insatiable need to acquire more and more money, which has led to the manifestation of a more extreme version of capitalism called neoliberalism. Eagleton Price lists 44 concepts that are interwoven into neoliberal thought, including globalization, free trade, deregulation, outsourcing, privatization, labor flexibility, and austerity. I have heard some define it loosely as globalization or capitalism on steroids. Not having much time to define any of these different aspects, my operational definition here of neoliberalism is the belief that the best way to measure human progress is through monetary terms. Therefore, if one believes that human progress or development is defined by how much money one earns, they have a neoliberal attitude. Climate change is associated with neoliberal, unrestrained extraction of resources. For example, polluted water from open-pit mining technique called cyanide lixiviation results in infertility in women, birth defects in humans and animals, skin deformities on adults and children, cancer, death of fish, and destroys geographical and ecological systems. Pollution due to increased levels of particulate matter, ozone, and carbon warms the earth, and warmer air holds higher levels of these pollutants. It is thought by some feminists that the people running the country see the earth only as a resource and do not see the interconnectedness of nature. If the elites or those who have power in this world would adopt an indigenous or organismic worldview, they would be more likely to see the role of humans as stewards of the land rather than conquerors of it. If only we could get the rulers of the world to adopt an organismic worldview. According to Starhawk, her spirituality is rooted in the experience of the earth as a living, conscious being and considers the earth to be sacred. In ecofeminism, to view the earth as a machine is referred to as shallow ecology and is human-centered. To refer to the earth as an organism is called deep ecology, which is earth-centered. But how do we get people to shift their understanding of the earth and their relationship with it? Paradigm shifting is a major challenge because we cannot control or change what other people do, think, or believe. But we can control how we react and respond. Therefore, paradigm shifting begins with the self. Having a worldview based on interconnectivity and complex systems can lead to a change in behavior, which could then potentially lead to a critical mass. One's worldview is one's philosophy of life, and therefore one's worldview could make the difference between how we respond to climate change and how we treat the planet. New materialism, which is a relatively new movement, has the effect of reconfiguring our very understanding of matter, and can thus help us transform the ways we currently produce, reproduce, and consume our material environment. This is important for paradigm shifting because it provides a way or mechanism for transforming our behaviors as a result of a new way of understanding matter, or the earth. Therefore, I postulate that having a worldview that aligns more closely with reality, or what research has found to be real, is more likely to foster healthier attitudes and behaviors. Using quantum physics and post-humanism, I will show that having an organismic worldview aligns more closely with reality. According to post-humanism, objects in the world are not passive and fixed. Barad discusses our role as part of the dynamic process involved in manifestation and says that humans are co-creators of life through what she calls intra-action. Intra-action is the agentic process involving an entangled web of negotiations. She states that intra-action signifies the mutual constitution of entangled agencies, which is in contrast to the usual interaction, which assumes that there are separate individual agencies that precede their interaction. Within the interaction process, all things, humans and objects, are entangled and are active players in the meta-negotiation of agency and choice. This post-humanist interaction process is consistent with research in quantum physics because at a specific time, there is a unique arrangement of particles in the material realm where unique, well-defined locations for macroscopic objects can be constructed out of the properties. This is why the observer's choice is important, because quantum research describes the world as a probability distribution, or a field of potentiality lying in wait for an observer's choice to determine what becomes manifest. So the world lies in potential representations of reality until we enact a choice, and when we do, the world collapses into one thing. The process where all possibilities lie await in potential is called the quantum potential, or the structure process. This is important for paradigm shifting because our choices have the power within the interaction or quantum potential process, where we can choose to treat the Earth and all that's in it as active living realities sharing our space. Therefore, we have power within the living dynamic process where complex systems interact, as shown by post-humanism and quantum physics. If research in quantum physics shows that everything is interconnected and part of a dynamic process involving interlocking systems and forces, then an organismic worldview is more in line with reality. Perhaps if we could adopt an organismic worldview, we can begin to heal the divide between humans and the environment. And this is my utopian possibility. Thank you. Us